The sun was spilling gold across the park that Saturday morning, the kind of light that makes the grass look freshly painted. David and I walked side by side, our fingers loosely laced while Buddy tugged on the leash, nose twitching at every scent in the air. We laughed about silly things. A couple jogging in neon shorts, the smell of coffee drifting from a food cart nearby. Everything felt so ordinary, so safe. And yet, I've learned that sometimes it's the tiniest moment that shatters the illusion. Out of nowhere, Buddy stiffened. His ears shot up, and before I could even react, he bolted ahead, dragging me a few steps until David grabbed the leash. But instead of barking or circling nervously like he always did with strangers, Buddy launched himself at a woman by the fountain. His tail wagged like a helicopter blade, his paws clung to her dress, and he smothered her face with kisses. Pure, unfiltered joy, the kind of greeting he reserved for people he knew. The woman bent down, laughing as if this were the most natural thing in the world. She stroked his head, cooing, "Oh, he remembers me." My heart skipped. Remembers. My smile froze, but my mind raced. Buddy doesn't react like this to strangers. Ever. I swallowed hard, my voice sharper than I meant as I asked, "Remembers? From where?" The woman straightened up, brushing dog hair from her dress with an easy grin. "Guess I just have that effect on animals," she said lightly, as if Buddy's reaction was nothing more than chance. But I knew better. Buddy didn't just lose himself like that for no reason. His loyalty had always been steady, almost protective, and seeing him melt into her arms set off an alarm deep in my chest. David laughed. That nervous laugh I'd heard before, the kind he used when he wanted to smooth things over fast. He tugged Buddy back, muttering something about him being too friendly these days. But my eyes stayed on her, watching the way Buddy's body leaned toward her even when David pulled. His whines, his eager little jumps. It wasn't the excitement of a dog meeting someone new. It was recognition, familiarity. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, though the morning air was crisp. I forced a polite smile, the kind you give when you're trying to hide 1,000 questions. "Well," I managed, my voice caught between casual and cutting. "He doesn't usually act like this with strangers." My words hung in the air, heavier than I intended, and for a second, I thought I caught the faintest flicker of unease in her eyes. The woman crouched again, scratching behind Buddy's ears like she'd done it 100 times before. "Such a sweetheart," she murmured, almost too comfortably. My stomach twisted. I could feel the weight of something unsaid pressing between us, like an invisible thread pulling tight. I wanted to shake it off, to chalk it up to coincidence, but Buddy's joy screamed otherwise. David cleared his throat and tugged at my arm, urging me to move along. "Come on, let's not hold her up," he said quickly, flashing a smile that looked more like a mask than anything genuine. I glanced at him, searching for reassurance, but all I found was that familiar glimmer of evasion. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Buddy whined when the woman finally let go, as if he was being pulled away from someone he belonged to. We walked on, but I couldn't hear David's small talk anymore. My mind was buzzing, replaying her words like a broken record. "Oh, he remembers me." The phrase clung to me, unsettling, refusing to let go. And deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Because if Buddy remembered her, then I had to ask myself the question that burned hotter with every step. Why? She introduced herself as Sophie, all casual smiles, like she'd just bumped into us by chance. "I guess I just give off dog lover energy," she joked, her tone breezy, almost rehearsed. But while she talked, Buddy sat right at her feet, alert, waiting. Then she whispered a single word, a command I'd never heard before, and to my shock, Buddy obeyed instantly. No hesitation, just instant obedience, like he'd been trained by her. My chest tightened. I forced a laugh, pretending it was nothing, but my stomach churned. I glanced at David, searching his face for some clue, and there it was. That nervous chuckle again. Too quick, too thin. "He's full of surprises lately," he said, tugging Buddy's leash, pulling him back like he was trying to erase the moment. But the damage was done. My dog had listened to her, not me. And that meant only one thing. Sophie wasn't a stranger at all. I tucked that thought away, pretending I hadn't noticed. "Nice to meet you," I said, my smile stiff. Sophie's eyes lingered just a second too long before she turned to leave. Buddy whined, straining against the leash until she disappeared down the path. I stayed silent, but inside, the unease had sharpened into suspicion. It felt like the earth beneath my feet had tilted, and David's hand squeezing mine was suddenly more of a distraction than comfort. On the walk back home, I couldn't keep my thoughts from circling. I asked David casually, almost playfully, "So, how did Sophie know that command? Since when does Buddy listen to strangers like that?" His grip tightened on the leash, and he didn't miss a beat. "You're reading too much into it," he said, brushing it off with that dismissive tone he used whenever I poked too close to something he didn't want to explain. My pulse quickened. Paranoid. That's the word he'd use next. I could already feel it coming, like clockwork. And sure enough, he sighed and muttered, "Mia, don't be paranoid. She probably just guessed the word." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the more he spoke, the less convinced I was. His voice carried that shaky edge, the one that always betrayed him when he lied about little things, like forgetting a bill or misplacing his phone. Only this time, it wasn't little. I stayed quiet, staring at Buddy trotting ahead, tail wagging, still restless as if searching the park for Sophie's face. My chest tightened again. That dog was my compass, loyal, honest, incapable of pretense. And in that moment, it felt like Buddy was telling me the truth David refused to admit. My hands curled into fists inside my jacket pocket. Something was off, and no amount of paranoid would erase it. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. After dinner, Buddy paced near the front door, scratching and whining softly, his eyes fixed on the entryway. It wasn't his usual restless energy. It was expectancy, the kind of waiting a dog does when someone familiar is about to arrive. My stomach dropped as I watched him, ears perked, tail flicking with hope. He wasn't waiting for me. He wasn't waiting for David. He was waiting for her. I sat on the couch, arms wrapped tightly around myself, trying to push the thought away. But Buddy made it impossible. Every few minutes he'd sit, ears tuned, then rush to the door at the faintest sound outside. I whispered his name, trying to distract him, but he barely looked my way. His loyalty was clear, unshakable, and suddenly I realized it wasn't mine alone anymore. That truth hit harder than any words David could throw at me. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching with a mix of anger and clarity. Buddy already knew Sophie. He knew her commands, her scent, her touch. And if Buddy knew her, that meant she had been here before. The thought echoed in my mind like a drum beat, steady and merciless. I didn't say a word to David that night, not yet. Instead, I tucked my suspicion close, where it could grow stronger, sharper. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach and a certainty I could no longer ignore. David's reassurances had dissolved into thin air, leaving only the echo of his nervous laugh. If Buddy had been my first clue, then it was time to follow the trail myself. Quietly, carefully, I slipped into detective mode, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I needed to know. I started with his phone, waiting until he hopped in the shower. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. Names, numbers, nothing unusual at first, until one contact caught my eye. A man's name. But the messages beneath it? They weren't written to a man. The tone was intimate, playful, peppered with inside jokes that didn't belong to us. And there it was, clear as daylight. Sophie's name tucked into a thread where she didn't belong. My throat tightened as I swiped through the messages, every line slicing deeper than the one before. The lies, the little emojis, the affection. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't imagination. It was betrayal spelled out on a glowing screen. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone, but I forced myself to keep looking, because I wasn't done yet. I dug deeper, opening the photo gallery, and that's when the air left my lungs. Buddy's golden fur filled the screen, not at the park, not at our home, but curled up on a gray couch I didn't recognize. Sophie's apartment. My fingers pinched the screen to zoom in, and there it was, undeniable. David's jacket hanging on the back of a chair, his shoes kicked carelessly near the door. Proof, framed in pixels, that Buddy had been there, that they had been there. A fire ignited in my chest, burning hotter with every swipe. Photo after photo. Buddy sprawled across her rug, Buddy playing with a toy I'd never bought. Buddy resting his head on her lap like she belonged to him. Each image was a knife, cutting away the version of my life I thought was real. I pressed a hand to my mouth, holding back a sob that threatened to burst out. Rage and heartbreak tangled together until I could barely breathe. I set the phone down, my hands clammy against the screen. Every instinct screamed to march into the bathroom, to throw the evidence in David's face, to scream until the walls shook. But something stronger held me back. Not fear, not doubt, strategy. If he could keep secrets, so could I. And this time, mine would be louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. I closed the phone and slipped it back exactly where I'd found it, careful not to leave a single trace. My heart still thundered in my chest, but my face, when David stepped out of the shower minutes later, stayed calm, almost bored. He kissed my cheek, wrapped in a towel, and I managed to smile back, though inside I was drowning in the weight of what I knew. He had no idea the game had shifted. The rest of the day, I watched him through new eyes. Every laugh, every excuse, every glance at his phone was part of a puzzle I'd already solved. But instead of confrontation, I carried silence like armor. It wasn't weakness. It was preparation. He thought he held the power, sneaking around with Sophie in the shadows. But I had the light now, and with it, the chance to choose how his secrets would finally come undone. I sat on the porch that evening, Buddy's head resting on my lap, his eyes looking up at me with a loyalty that never wavered. My fingers stroked his fur, steadying my breath. "You showed me, didn't you?" I whispered. And in that moment, I made a promise, not to David, not to Sophie, but to myself. Their betrayal wouldn't break me. It would fuel me. And when the time was right, the truth would explode in the open where neither of them could hide. By the time the next weekend rolled around, I had my plan polished, every detail tucked neatly into place. On the surface, it looked harmless, just a Sunday barbecue, nothing out of the ordinary. I invited family, a few close friends, the kind of people David would never suspect. He was even cheerful about it, joking about grilling too many burgers and bragging about his famous marinade. He had no idea he was seasoning his own downfall. I moved through the day with deliberate calm, setting the table, pouring drinks, greeting guests with a smile that masked the storm inside me. Buddy wagged his tail, weaving between legs, soaking up the attention. But I knew the real moment hadn't come yet. I could feel it building, like a secret drumbeat only I could hear. And when the time came, I wanted it to strike hard, clean, undeniable. The laughter of family filled the backyard, The smell of charcoal clung to the air, and David played the part of the perfect host. But every time I looked at him, flipping burgers and clinking glasses, all I saw was a liar in borrowed skin. My hands itched to pull the curtain back, to let everyone see him the way I now did. And soon enough, that curtain was about to fall. After lunch, when the plates were stacked and people were settling into that lazy afternoon lull, I slipped inside and opened the back gate. Buddy darted out, tail high, ears pricked, like he already knew his cue. A few minutes later, right on schedule, Sophie arrived. I'd made sure she was accidentally invited through a mutual acquaintance who thought it was nothing more than friendly courtesy. But for me, it was the final piece of the trap. Buddy spotted her instantly. He barreled across the yard, whining with joy, his paws clawing at her dress, tail wagging furiously. Gasps rippled through the group. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I let my gaze sweep across the faces. Confusion, curiosity, dawning realization. And then I smiled, sweet and sharp, the way you do when you've been waiting for a punchline only you understand. Funny, isn't it? I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. My voice carried across the yard, calm but cutting. Buddy only reacts like that to people he knows well. Almost like Sophie's been around our home for months. The words landed heavy, slicing through the air. Sophie's smile faltered, David's face drained pale, and the yard, once buzzing with laughter, fell into stunned silence. David's hand froze on the serving tray, his knuckles whitening as if he could somehow grip the lie tighter. Sophie stammered, brushing Buddy off, but the damage was already written across every face in that backyard. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of it press down on him. Then, with steady hands, I pulled out my phone. One swipe, and the screen lit up with photos no one could argue with. Gasps cut through the air as I held it high. Buddy curled on Sophie's couch. Buddy sprawled across her rug. David's jacket hanging in the background, his shoes by the door. I didn't need to narrate. The images spoke louder than any accusation I could make. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, almost gentle. Seems like Buddy's been more loyal than some people I know. Sophie's face crumpled, David's lips parted, but no excuse came out. The whispers spread, sharp and merciless, each one another nail in the coffin of his credibility. And I stood there, tall, unshaken, with Buddy pressed loyally against my leg. This wasn't just exposure. It was justice unfolding in front of every witness who mattered. And the best part? I hadn't even raised my voice. The aftermath was exactly what I'd intended. David stood there, humiliated, stripped bare in front of the very people whose respect he thrived on. His excuses tangled in his throat, his eyes darting desperately for someone to save him. But no one did. Sophie fled first, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared down the street, Buddy whining after her before turning back to press against me. She didn't deserve his loyalty. Neither did David. In the days that followed, the phone calls started. Long voicemails, texts at every hour, begging, pleading, bargaining. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We can fix this. Each word was nothing but static to me, noise I refused to let back in. I didn't respond once. I'd given him enough of my time, enough of my trust, enough of my heart. And now, I was done. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. Cold paperwork, signatures on a page, but behind every pen stroke was the heat of my resolve. I secured the house, but more importantly, I secured Buddy. He was mine, as he'd always been, the only one who never faltered, never lied. David tried to argue, tried to twist the facts, but even he couldn't deny it. Buddy had chosen me. The nights grew quieter once David was gone, but instead of emptiness, I felt something else. Space. Space to breathe, to laugh without second-guessing, to move through my own home without the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. Buddy seemed lighter too, as if he sensed the shift. He followed me room to room, curling at my feet when I read, nudging my hand when I lingered too long in thought, reminding me that loyalty doesn't waver, not when it's real. There were moments when guilt tried to creep in, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far by exposing him so publicly. But then I'd remember the photos, the messages, the look in Sophie's eyes, and the way David dismissed my instincts with that cruel word, paranoid. No. He'd written his own ending long before I revealed it. I'd simply pulled the curtain back, and for the first time in years, I felt free from his shadows. Friends called, some offering sympathy, others quiet admiration for the way I'd handled it. I didn't brag, I didn't gloat, but deep down, I knew I had taken my power back. And nothing, not David's pleas or Sophie's shame, could undo that. My world was smaller now, yes, but cleaner, honest, and it was enough. A few weeks later, I found myself back at the park on another bright Saturday morning. The air was crisp, children's laughter floated across the playground, and the world felt lighter, as if it had exhaled with me. Buddy bounded ahead, chasing after the ball I threw, his golden fur catching the sunlight like it was spun from fire. His joy was contagious, pure and unshaken, and for the first time in months, I laughed freely, without restraint. When he raced back, tongue lolling, I knelt down and hugged him tight, burying my face in his fur. He smelled of grass and sunshine, nothing complicated, nothing false. In that moment, I realized that through every lie, every betrayal, Buddy had been the one constant truth. He had chosen me long before I ever knew I needed choosing, and I would never forget that. I kissed the top of his head, whispering the words that sealed it all. Dogs always know who's loyal. Buddy chose me, and I chose freedom. And as I stood, watching him dart back into the open field, I felt it, not just survival, but liberation. My life, once tangled in secrets, was mine again.